Today's presentation is created specifically for Vision Council members. We're honored to present as your consultant and full-service UDI solution provider for health authorities around the globe. Today's topic is what to know for upcoming US and UDAMED UDI updates. We will be presenting best practices concerning UDI preparation related to eyewear products, focusing on UDAMED. We'll talk a little bit about the status of Brexit and do a quick summary on other emerging regional mandates. I'm Angela Alexandro, Head of Marketing for Life Sciences. If you have questions, please submit them anytime in the Q&A panel. We will review and answer as many as possible during the session, and we may follow up with you individually, so feel free to submit your questions at any time. After the meeting, which will be recorded, the slides and the video link will be distributed to everybody that registered by email. A little bit about ReadTech Life Sciences and Vision Council. You'll find us listed on the Vision Council website under Member Services as a consulting partner for UDI. And on the ReadTech website at readtech.com, just search for Vision Council and you'll see our dedicated portal page with links to more device product management information. And a little bit about what we do at ReadTech. We specialize in the preparation, submission, and lifecycle data management of medical device UDI product information. ReadTech's an industry expert in structured product labeling, SPL, participating in the US FDA pilot and with other trade groups. We've submitted over 500,000 SPLs to the FDA Good ID, and annually we account for about 31% of all the electronic records submitted to Good ID. We serve some of the world's largest device manufacturers, about half of the top 30 ranked by annual revenues. Additionally, ReadTech collaborates with industry standards providers and various organizations who need to bring UDI education to their member groups. Today's presenters, both from ReadTech, are Gary Sainer, our Senior Manager of Information Solutions, and Andrew Pfeiffer, a Senior Account Executive. A little bit about the agenda. You can go to the agenda slide. We will first talk about a recap on the global and FDA UDI, things to know there. We'll do a segment devoted to EU UDI and timing. We'll also talk about how to prepare and comply with UDI and device registration. Andrew's going to talk a little bit about lessons learned and the ReadTech experience, and at the end, we'll take your questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Sainer to take us through unique device identification, kind of the basics 101.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I know Drew and I are excited to share some of the details about UDI to this particular audience, and always glad to reconnect with the vision industry to talk a little bit further about their particular products and complying with UDI. I know most of you have a background with UDI. I suspect there's a portion out there that are perhaps new to the topic, so I'm just going to spend a couple pages here on UDI, going over a little bit of the basics, make sure we are level set everyone, and that way we have a good understanding of the terms that we will be using. The UDI, unique device identifier, is a unique identifier for medical devices. It consists of two parts. The first part is mandatory and identifies the labeler and a particular product. That number will change if there's an updated to the version or the particular model of that product. So it really does focus down into a particular device. The second component is a production identifier, and it's conditional. It may not have any of those listed items there, or a combination thereof, or it might even have all. So if the manufacturing date, expiration date, lot or batch number, serial number is on the product, then those particular identifiers need to be included in a production identifier. Now, the one at the bottom there is highlighted with software ID. That is a particular attribute added with the European Union. So they do have some special combinations for software identification. The FDA handles a little bit differently, but in the event you have any of those controls, you will need to include it as part of your full UDI. if we take that UDI and combine the first component with that number at the bottom of the screen there, preceded by the parentheses 01, which is a code that's indicating that the following identification is for the device, and simply add that together with the production identifier. In this case, I included all the instances of those, but again, you may not have all of them, or a portion, you might not have any of those. And we'll talk a little bit about class 1 products, which have some exceptions that disallow or allow the production identifier to be not included in UDI, so for class 1 products. So we'll take a further look at that. How do you present that UDI? Well, many times it's presented in a single dimensional barcode, and that's certainly fine. Or you can present it in a 2-dimensional barcode. You have some options there. I'm using GS1 standard as an example here. So GS1 128 linear barcode at the top and a GS1 data matrix at the bottom. Accompanying the actual barcode is human readable text. And that can be across the bottom of the barcode. It can be on the side. And underneath it, to the left, to the above it, but it does have to be there, and in some cases it can be split apart, so you don't have to put everything on a single long line. I know space is a problem many times, and there's various standards that need to be conformed to. So GS1 is the predominant standard organization that is accepted by the FDA and the EU. HIBIC is also accepted, ICC BBA is accepted. And the EU added a 4th one. It's not recognized by the FDA, but EU does allow IFA, which is a pharmacy-based standard. And we'll see how much use it actually does get, but I think it might be interesting for some combination product identification. Let's now take a look at some of the labels. I included a sample of a European Union label. We don't have time to go into all the details here, but there are some new things that you ought to be aware of. The MD in a rectangle is brand new for medical device. There's enhanced use of warnings and electronic information for use URLs. But today we're talking about the UDI, and here's where the UDI would be included in this particular sample. Again, space is at a premium, so 2-dimensional barcode might be a good option for you. Now, with that little bit of background underneath us, the topic now of taking a look around the world, there's a lot of regulatory bodies that are adopting UDI. Certainly there's history with the US going back to 2014, and we see a number of other countries there and health authorities that are rolling out UDI. This particular list has documentation. Those in bold are actually enforcing and have some items coming into play. EU's just on the cusp of the date of application. And then there's a second list, and you can literally go around the world with all those different health authorities that have plans or making plans to move forward with UDI. The next 2 slides I'll leave as homework for you. They're pretty busy, and they chart the various health authorities and what's happening in the next 2 years. If we do the similar chart and go long-term, 2023 out to 2025, again, it looks very busy. I think what we'll do is maybe stop and talk a little bit about UK, because that particular region, the MHRA in UK has now separated out from European Union, and we do actually get a lot of questions about what's going on with UDI in UK. Couple points to pick out of this particular slide is that the MHRA has created a new platform to register medical devices. It's referred to as DOORS, the Device Online Registration System. There's some requirements about when these things take into place. There is a waive by class 3, 2s, and 1 in general throughout the rest of this year, May, September, and then rolling into January next year, the class 1s. So there's a lot of similarity in the device attributes that are being collected, roughly 70 or so. Some of them are very similar to the European Union data set, but there's some links that we provide in this particular presentation. You can dive into that a little bit further or get a hold of us, and we'd be glad to dig out those details. And by the way, Northern Ireland has a whole different set of regulations. They're kind of set aside with different type of pathway. For your reference, this is a summary of those regulations, and you can follow the links here and look at the timing guidelines in the bottom left. So we give you some good summary note card, if you will, for the UK. I'd be glad to talk further. With time considerations, I think what we'll do now is switch over to the US FDA. And Drew, do you want to start picking up here and give a summary of where we're at with the FDA?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Gary. So yeah, I'm going to take everyone through some of the requirements for the FDA for the FDA UDI, and then we'll get into the EU in a little bit. So just to kind of start off, this slide just kind of shows, as Gary had shown just previously for the UK, this is just a for the FDA, is a little note card showing some of the compliance timelines. And as you can see, most of them have already passed, and the only one left is for Class 1 devices, which is really most pertinent to everybody that's pretty much on this call, coming up in September 26th of 2022. You know, there's a bunch of different things that need to be done in addition to the data submissions to the UDI. So, you know, if you aren't utilizing a FDA accredited issuing agency, then, you know, you can use your UPC, and I'll go into that a little bit further. And there are about 57 different data attributes that do need to be collected. Some of them are conditional, some of them are required, some of them are optional, and, you know, we'll also go into that in a little bit as well. Gary, next slide, please. So here are some of the kind of core aspects of the FDA UDI requirements. So the first one is the labeling. So you would need to add both a device identifier and a production identifier on the device labeling and packaging. Now, I do want to kind of make a note of that. So for Class 1 manufacturers, typically you don't have to include the production identifier as part of the labeling, or in the UDI really, for that matter. You know, and as I mentioned previously, if you're currently using a UPC on your products, you can actually use that in lieu of UDI. So yeah, so that's, and then you also want to make sure that you have a human readable as well as an automatic or a human readable and machine readable, you know, on your label as well. The date format, you know, must be labeled as year, month, day. And direct marking does not apply to, in this particular case, if you are utilizing UPCs. And then, of course, the other core component to the UDI requirements is the good ID. So, you know, in this case, you would need to submit a total of 57 data attributes. And as I mentioned, yeah, some of them are required and some are conditionally required depending on what you have populated, and then there are some that are optional. And then, of course, there's some reporting in the annual reports, you know, the recalls, post-market surveillance, you know, and that sort of thing. Next slide, Gare. So here we're looking at the timeline, and as I had mentioned earlier, you know, the FDA has delayed the Class 1 timeline multiple times at this point. So I think originally it was, I believe, in like 2018, and then it was delayed into 2020, and then it was delayed again to 2022. I think part of that was in part due to the COVID. So I guess we don't really know at this point if it's going to get delayed again. I don't foresee it happening at this point again, but again, you never know with the FDA. So yeah, so at this point, it's really at 2022 as a timeline. So for the UDI Class 1 exceptions, there are 3. The first one being the production identifier. So as I mentioned previously, for all Class 1 devices, you doesn't require a production identifier as part of the UDI. The second one being GMP, which stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. So products that are GMP exempt will not have to be UDI compliant. And then finally, that last one there, again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, if you are utilizing UPC codes on your labels, you will not have to obtain a unique device identifier. So you can use that in lieu of your UDI. However, that still needs to be reported to the good ID.
So Andrew, one thing that we have seen some companies get a little confused with is they see the 510K exception and think that would also disallow them for or exempt them from UDI. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? Because that's not the same as a GMP exemption.
Right, exactly. So 510K exemptions really pertains more towards class 2 devices, since they are the ones that have to put in for a 510K. All class 1 manufacturers typically don't have to obtain a 510K for their products. So for a 510K exemption, that does not pertain, or that does not, I guess, you get you out of the UDI ruling. So only the GMP exemption really would get you out of that. Gary, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's really good to clarify that, because some people do make that little stumble.
Sure.
Let's move on to the label then.
Yeah. So for the UDI label example, as Gary had mentioned earlier, sometimes you may not have a whole lot of real estate. Now in this example, what we're using is we're showing you guys a linear barcode with a UPC. You can use that data matrix code if you choose to. But again, as I mentioned, you don't have to include the production identifier. In this example, you're seeing the lot number, the serial number, the expiration date in that year, month, day format. But just want to make sure that you choose that, if you are going to use the UPC, that you still report that information to the good ID. So this is actually an exemption letter that from the Vision Council. So for spectacle lenses, so any manufacturer that does manufacture spectacle lenses with a product code of HQG, the FDA did determine that manufacturers of these prescription lenses, specifically the glass or plastic lenses, are not medical device labelers, and therefore those products do not need a UDI. And I'll show you that in a second. There'll be a little chart that kind of goes through all the various different product codes for those various different, vision products. Yeah, in this case, this is a lens exemption. There is another one that's pending. We'll talk about that in a second. Then we have not heard back from the FDA yet, but I know that some of our contacts at the Vision Council are optimistic that there will be that an exemption will come through from the FDA, and that is actually pertaining to the frames. So as you can see in that 4th row there, where it says to be determined for the UDI, there is that letter request out to the FDA to be exempt from the UDI component. So that has not been determined yet from the FDA. But as you can see above that, there are 3 product codes. All the lenses in red, they are exempt. And then the 2 at the very bottom there, the sunglasses and the spectacle readers, they are required. And then on this slide here, pretty much all of these are exempt, except for that first product code, HPI, which is the aided vision, optical AC powered. So that one is required. But all the other various product codes, the lenses, the frame, ophthalmic frames, spectacles, microscopes, they're all exempt from UDI. So this is just kind of showing you the variety of data attributes that need to be collected. Now, I said 57 earlier. There are actually 64 total, but 7 of them are actually populated by the FDA. Now it's showing you some of the ones in red. Those are ones that are required. And then depending on how you answer them, obviously there's some that are conditionally required and some that are optional. So Gary, if you go into the next slide. Okay, so in this case, you'll see that there are some that are not required in this case by class 1 manufacturers. So they're just not applicable, for such as the pre-market submission number, supplement number, and then a bunch under the identification, such as secondary DI issuing agency. Especially if you're using UPCs, you would not need to input any of that information. And also for direct marking, because direct marking does not apply in this case if you're using UPCs. So so a lot of this information would not be applicable. So at this point, I am going to turn it back to my good friend Gary Sainer. And Gary, if you would go ahead and give everyone a nice little tour of the EU MDR requirements.
Very good. Thank you, Drew. That was a real good summary of what's going on in the FDA and some of the exemptions. It's kind of a convoluted pathway, but we're working our way through it. As we turn our attention over to the EU, there's a couple things that we want to highlight. There's first a little bit of comment about what happened in European Union. There was a huge regulatory reform. So unlike the FDA, which added UDI on top of the existing device registration and evaluation framework that they had in place, the European Commission pretty much cleared the table, rewrote a lot of the legislation, and there were 3 directives that were in play in the European Union: medical devices directive, active implantable medical device directive, and the in vitro diagnostic directive. Those 3 had various levels of implementation, and you saw some variance in the way they were implemented at each of the member states. Those 3 are replaced by 2 regulations, not directives, but by regulations. So the medical device regulation and the in vitro diagnostic regulations now coming into play. And the good news is that they are legally binding across all the member states. So you'll see a uniform set of rules, if you will, across all the different countries. The bad news is there's a lot of new rules. So yeah, there's a lot of things to become familiar with. The European Commission actually put a little to-do list for you, 12 items here, but each one has, it's like the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of subtopics underneath it. We're going to focus in on number 9 that talks about an implementation plan, and the sub-projects inside that particular plan would include a number of topics related to clinical evaluations, your technical documents, and so on. And today we really only have time to talk about UDI and the device registration. So one of the very first questions that we get is, what is the timing of all this implementation and when's it going to come about? There's 2 dates in play right now. The date of application for the MDR has originally in 2020, but now it's in 2021, May 26. So we're right there. And the next date would be a year from now, the date of application for the in vitro diagnostics. So those 2 dates are very critical. And the implementation of their database, this is the European equivalent of Good ID, referred to as EUDAMED. Again, it has been delayed 2 years from the original scheduled time, but we're expecting it to receive an announcement that it's all ready, fully functional, it's passed an audit, and then that particular notice triggers a time clock, a 6-month time period where industry has time to react to that particular notice, and then an 18-month period thereafter where legacy devices, medical device compliant, and in vitro diagnostic regulation compliant devices all need to be registered by that period of time in that 18-month window. Or if there's a serious event connected to a particular device, that does cause a registration to happen immediately as a prerequisite to report the serious event. Now, going on in the background, there are a lot of activities at the European Commission. They're actually rolling out and have rolled out one module, I should say. So back in December of 2021 or 2020, the actor module was open for voluntary use. This is good news. You're able to go there and request a single registration number. I highly recommend you folks doing that to get that rolling. And then September of this year, we're expecting this next 2 modules to open up for voluntary use. And this would be September of this year, the device and UDI registration module, and what is referred to as the certificate and notified body module. There's a total of 6 modules in the UDAMED. So the other remaining 3 will probably have some voluntary use opening up before the deadline. No guarantee on that. It might actually occur at the launch notice. We'll wait and see about those other three modules. To summarize some of the UDI requirements, and we're focusing now down very similar to what Drew had covered for the FDA. A lot of similarities, but you have to watch some of the nuances because it's not a cookie cutter implementation of what the FDA has done. Again, UDI placed on the label of the product and packaging in both human readable and AIDC, automatic ID, and data capture format. They have regulations about reusable devices being permanently marked, and they have a database to collect data, referred to that UDAMED. In this case, there's almost twice the number of fields that need to be collected. And it's a little bit more complicated with a hierarchy of that particular data set. And then there is the reporting. So very similar in concept to the FDA. Nuance is this patient implant card down at the bottom, where UDI does need to be included in a patient implant card. So if you have that, that would be something that you need to be conforming to. So this again is the note card, very much like what Drew had presented earlier. It has the compliance dates on the bottom left-hand corner that you can focus in on, and just a summary of some of the things that are happening. There is this concept of a buddy, which is referred a nickname for basic UDI DI, and that's a device group concept. And there's some different standards. So you might have been familiar with GMDN, the Global Medical Device Nomenclature. The European Union has now specified a European version of an Italian nomenclature. So that is going to be a little bit different. You have SRNs instead of Dun and Bradstreet DUNS numbers. And you have this option for a different standard. Now, the good news is that the issuing entities here, GS1, HIBIC, and ICCBA, are the same as the FDA. So if you're using any one of those 3, you'll be able to continue to use that in Europe. There is complications in the actual timing, and there's special rules and timing for legacy devices and MDR devices and IVDR, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But right now, Angela, I think we might have a good break point here for a poll questions. Could you go ahead and launch that?
Yep. So here is our first poll question. Appreciate your response. When does your organization plan to begin submitting production med device UDI and registration data to the UDAMED UDI module? Please select 1. Is that beginning of voluntary period, which we're anticipating towards the end of this year? Would it be 2022? After the start of the mandatory period, around November of 2022, just prior to the deadline, or you don't know yet? So we've got responses coming in. All right. And just a couple more seconds here. Thank you for playing along, and we will share the results. Sorry about that. We're having some technical difficulties. There we go. So it looks like about 59% don't know yet. All right. So Gary, we're moving on.
Yes, thank you very much. That's it's interesting. We're a lot of people just trying to figure this European Union out, and that's not too uncommon at this point in the game. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the details of how to prepare and comply with UDI device registration. I think we have covered a little bit of the groundwork about what needs to be done, but this next little session talks about what are the actual details and gives you some steps along the way. We divided this into the 4 C's of complying with UDI device registration. The first C, the letter C there, would be create an environment, collect the data, cleanse the data, and then actually go about complying with the regulations. So the first 3 are in the beginning, preparing for the final step 4, which is the actual execution of complying with the regulations and making submissions. So for each one of these steps, there's a number of little sub bullets. So let's get started on step 1. Step 1 has 3 items up on the screen, A, B, and C. We'll actually talk about D, E, and F in a little bit. But you want to create your team. This is cross-functional team, and have them train. One of the tasks for this particular team is to identify the requirements for your particular portfolio and understand all the exceptions, the rules, the timing, and so on. And then to evaluate your situation. Now, what you're going to find most likely is there's a gap in what you have and what you need, and then putting a plan together to make sure that you address that. We don't have time to dive into all of these, but I'm going to focus in on some of the rules, the applicable rules, and the timing. For this particular audience in the vision industry, here's a side-by-side comparison of where we're at with eyewear products. So there's a number of required items there according to the FDA UDI, and Drew highlighted some of those particular items. The spectacle frames being pending, and the contact lenses are required, the hard lenses, but we have this whole category of soft contact lenses on hold, not being required. So we'll have to see what happens there. If you do the comparison to the European Union, there was a guidance that came out previously, and it explicitly mentioned spectacle lens and the ready readers, as I refer to them, are actually required. So that's quite different for the spectacle lens. So the EU, where you did enjoy an exception, now they are required to have UDI. So that's quite a change in policy and what you need to prepare for. The other to be decided, there's some reference to a guidance hopefully coming out later this year, supposedly in 2021, that addresses some of these issues about these other product codes. So we're waiting to hear that for sure about where they stand. We'll have to find out if the European Union is including some of these, or if there's some exceptions would apply. Again, just don't know yet, but as we find out, we'll pass that information on to you. So those are some exceptions and different rules that would apply to your particular industry products. One of the other aspects is making sure you understand the different categories of devices that the European Commission uses, because they set timing and rules and regulations for each one of these categories, and they are different. So the first one is pretty straightforward. This is a product, let's say an eyewear product that you manufacture today, distribute in Europe, But for whatever reason, come the date of application, May 26th of this year, you elect not to place that product on the market anymore. So they're basically discontinued. They do have a connection with the MDR in the event that there's a serious incident that needs to be reported. So at that point in time, these devices, even though they were put out on the market originally under the directive, they would still need to use UDAMED to report a serious incident, and there's some special identifiers for those particular devices. But other than that, there's no MDR or other regulations that would come into play for those particular products. I suspect a good portion of your portfolio falls into this middle category. The European Commission refers to those as legacy devices, and these are devices that currently have a certificate under a directive, and you elect to continue to place them on the market after the date of application. So there's some timing that we'll get into about how long you can do that, as long as your certificate is valid and there's no significant design changes to that particular product. You can actually extend the life of that product out to 3 additional years. But they eventually, the certificate will expire, and you can take the equivalent product and have it go through the rigors of the device regulations and be recertified in that particular legislation, and then go forward under the MDR. So these are, the last category are those devices that do in fact meet the MDR regulations and are put onto the market with that particular certificate. There's also Class 1 devices. Now they do not, for the most part, they're self-certified and do not have certificates, other than the measuring and the sterilization versions. So they do have some requirements to have self-certification in place by the date of application. So that should have been something that you had been working on a while ago, to get your technical documents together and get your declarations in place that you do in fact comply. Here's a timeline of some of the activities that take place. So the lower screen, or the lower item here, is referring to legacy devices. Again, there's this period of time plus 3 years after the date of application where you can continue to place on the market. European Commission allows this additional year for sell-off through the supply chain. But then we had referred to it earlier, this 18-month period where the mandatory reporting, but you can obviously report voluntarily into the production system, and it counts as an official submission early on, starting this September is what we expect. Now, layered on top of this is the timeline for medical devices. So these are compliant with the MDR, and you see some similar timelines, at least for the registration is coinciding with the legacy devices. But MDR devices have some additional regulations that they need to have. So they do have to have that UDI on the label. So for those Class 1s, it's actually way out to 2024. And if they happen to be reusable, then it's 2 years later in 2027. But depending on your class, this is implemented by class here, and you can go back and take a look at this and see your particular timelines and requirements that you must meet. Angela, let's take another poll.
All right, hopefully the technology will be smooth here. What types of products are you submitting first to the UDAMED UDI module in production during the voluntary period? So is that going to be the legacy, so MDR devices, MDR system or procedure packs, IVDR devices, or don't know? And just click on the screen to let us know what you're thinking. And just a couple seconds here. All right, and then let's share the poll. Here we go. So it looks like quite a few folks not sure yet, and 36% legacy and 29% MDR. Very interesting.
Okay, very good. Let's move to the second three sub-bullets. We're back on step one, creating our environment. So we have some gaps, and we now have the rules in place, and we know what we kind of have to do, put that plan together, and you may have to change some of the infrastructure. You might go with different labeling systems and so on, and establish some data solutions. So as you start to evaluate this, you might look at different options for actually submitting the data. And this particular topic, I'm going to jump into, again, a little bit more detail and cover the various submission options available to making the submission to the European Commission UDAMED database. So there's four that are identified on this graphic. The first one being a manual entry where you're able to take information that is laid out in some structured fashion and enter that into the web interface. And obviously you have manual entries, some transcription errors here, some checking that needs to be done, obviously. Technically, you can, the European Commission does allow you to upload an XML file manually, browse to it, but that does mean it has to, excuse me, be created in XML, a valid XML, and pass all the schema and the verification activities. So that could be a little bit rigorous if you don't have some kind of a tool to create that. So the lower three would talk about creating that XML file with the data in it about your particular products and submitting it electronically, machine to machine, through what is referred to as an access point into the data exchange. So the data exchange does allow you to submit these files in bulk, and therefore there's no transcriptions errors. You can do it very quickly and accurately. That particular file can be generated by a system that you build on your own internally. Actually, pretty big endeavor. You can buy a system and install that and do the training and verification and updates and so on. Again, significant expert capital investment. And the last one is a concept that we actually here at ReTech offer, which is this hosted software, software as a solution where you're able to log into a platform that we have created, and therefore the cost of development is shared for each one of those subscriptions. So it does lower the initial investment considerably. From that particular system, you give us the raw information. It can be sent to us in manual or automated fashion. We build the XML file and submit it into the FDA. So that is a list of the various options that you have for submission. Now, moving on. I see we're close on time, so I'm going to have to accelerate here a little bit on some of these checklists. We're into collecting the data. You need to set up that product ID standard. Again, if you have GS1, highly recommend you continue with that. It's accepted. HIBIC is another well-used standard. And then assign these particular identifiers to your portfolio. So there is this concept of a basic UDI that I'm going to dive into because that gets a lot of questions, or we get a lot of questions about that. And I'm going to use the GS1 model only because it's so common to explain that basic UDI. GS1 has a term global model number, a GMN, and it's one and the same with the basic UDI. So it just happens to be their name for it. There's 25 maximum characters, no spaces. And the difference in a GMN is that there are two check digits at the end. So that's a little bit different. I'll do a little comparison here about actually what you're familiar with down at the bottom of G10. So in this particular scheme, there's a single check digit where the global model number has 2 characters. It could actually be a letter. And then working to the left, there's this model reference, which you create on your own as a manufacturer. That is compared to a item reference number, which is numeric. And again, you assign that to a particular product and model. But this model reference is a group identifier, and it can have some letters in there, upper and lower case as well. Again, to the left is the company prefix, and that's identical to what you're currently using in your G10s. Your UDI or device identifier has an indicator digit in the GS1 scheme. There's no such equivalent in the Buddy or the GMN model, and there's no barcode comparison because this is really not intended to be ever printed on your product package. It's really just an identifier for documentation and for the identification inside UDAMED. So if you were to create a Buddy, I have an example up here, and this is your family. You might manufacture plastic forceps as one of your products. You put one of those devices in that family, and it's very common to have a packaging hierarchy. So one forcep in 3 pouches, 2 pouches in a box, and so on. And device identifiers, just like you're doing it all currently in green. But now, let's say there's another model that's stainless steel, and there's a version that you sell stainless steel with locking feature. All of those could be inside this same Buddy. So that gives you a little bit of an idea how that actually fleshes out. All right, with time, I'm going to move on to step 2. Collect the UDI data, assemble the data, put some governance over it, make sure we have controls on it. Let's take a look at the current values that need to be assembled for the EU. There are a number of fields, 36, that are used for the basic UDI level, and all these have to be the same for the devices that are inside this group. Now, I have a note here to update to version 7 because there is some activity inside the European Commission to update this data set. This is version 5, but there are some changes that are in the works and about to be released. So keep an eye out for that. And then at the individual device level, there's additional 76. We won't go into all these, but it's quite rigorous to come up with each one of these. Moving on, step 3, now cleanse your data. You have the data all collected. You want to make sure it meets the specification in the business rules. There is a step 4 where you actually comply and make sure you create your accounts, submit the records, and verify that the records have been received successfully, and then keep and maintain that over the course of time. So if we do a quick summary here, these are the 3 major steps that you would need to follow in some form or fashion. Make it personal, obviously, but these are some things that you want to keep in mind. Andrew, I'm going to hand it back to you. If you can just wrap up and give us some lessons learned from our particular experience.
Yeah, sounds great, Gare. All right, so just give everyone some insights that we've learned over the past couple of years. Basically, what we've learned so far in best practices is, number 1, if you're already working on your FDI implementation strategy and you are selling into the EU, you want to start thinking about making EU part of your global UDI solution. You want to avoid building out single point solutions. It's just going to make more work for you. So, think about working smarter and not harder, and move towards a master data solution. So that way you can help expand by submitting that data to multiple different health authorities. So you'll have all that kind of data located in one central repository rather than having it kind of desegregated and decentralized. Also, you want to start early. So with the date of application coming up, May 26th, 2021, I want to ensure that you start to learn how to assign your basic UDI DIs and your UDI DIs to your products. For your class 1 devices, you self-certify that for MDR. And then, you want to ensure that you can start to create that account and register within the actor module, that UDAMED account, and register within the actor module. That currently is the only module that is live within UDAMED. So, you can start to do that, work with your competent authority to receive that SRN. If you are a non-EU manufacturer, you work with your authorized rep who will help verify the registration request before sending it to the National Competent Authority. And then also, lastly there's the European Commission quoted that there's going to be a high number of devices on the market. So, and they anticipate a bottleneck in reviews by the notified bodies. So you want to make sure that you avoid, that expected backlog of the European Commission notified body support. So, as I mentioned, do as much as you can now and start as early as possible. Next slide, Gar. So want to make sure that you watch for updates. Recently, the European Commission made a quick note. It wasn't really a big press release or anything, but they noted that there was a change in the voluntary submission timeframe. Originally, it was slated for May of this year, and they moved it back to September. They also recently released the new data dictionary and submission specs. So, they do have various different changes and update timings and guidances that kind of come out. So, just keep an eye out for different updates. RETEC will keep you updated on those sorts of things. We are part of the MedTech Europe working group. So, we kind of, let everyone know about certain things when they come out via our Knowledge Center or, via LinkedIn. Other things to keep in mind are, preparing your infrastructure and your UDI data. The EU UDI data set has twice the number of US UDI attributes and is much more complex than it is for the FDA. So it really can be a Herculean task if you don't have the knowledge set, if you don't have the resources, the bandwidth. So it's good to ensure that you kind of start preparing. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, start early. And then, start the data collection and cleansing, as soon as possible, because it always seems to take longer than expected. And if you can, leverage the UDAMED playground once it's opened to all manufacturers. Right now, it's only available to the UDAMED Data Exchange Working Group, but they will eventually open it up to all manufacturers. So, leverage that when you can. And then finally, RETEC, can help if you need it. So, we have a team of subject matter experts here on UDI knowledge that we can help, train everyone on the data attributes and the submission areas. So, and with regards to the collecting and cleansing of the EU UDI data, RETEC can help with the UDI templates that we've developed, as well as our cloud-based systems. So, engaging with a UDI data management system would be, probably the best way to go if you do have a high volume of SKUs that you need to submit, to the Good ID or to UDAMED. And so, with that being said, and Gareth, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, with that being said, what RETEC developed was what's called the RETEC single source platform. So this enables medical device manufacturers to quickly react affordably with the business critical product data submission requirements across the globe. So as I mentioned, it's basically a single scalable and flexible platform that allows you to maintain all of that information for all the various different health authorities and trading partners if you do need GDSN support in one central location. And then finally, This just shows a kind of a data flow of how you can engage with ReadTech. So whether you're interested in maybe utilizing an online interface to manage your data through a configurable workflow and submit that data to the UDAMED, to the GoodID, to China, you can transfer it via XML or Excel. Or there's another way where you can engage with ReadTech through a more integrated approach through the use of APIs. And our team will be able to work with your team to seamlessly set up that integrated connection, data connection. And so you can continue to manage that data in your system, and then we can call all the appropriate information to be validated and sent to that designated health authority. All right. So I guess.
All right.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yep, just to try to wrap up. We had a couple comments. Thank you for pointing out that sunglasses, and specifically Plano sunglasses, are not considered medical devices in the EU. They're PPE, and they won't require UDI, so good to note. I wanted to get maybe one question in before we close. Should we tackle FDA or EU first? Which one of you guys wants to answer that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
With the FDA being very mature in their regulations and their framework, that would tend to cause me to move toward the FDA and get my class 1s taken care of right now. And obviously, except for the frames, which is still an outstanding question, we want to make sure that hopefully by the end of the year we'll hear one way or the other about spectacle frames being submitted to the FDA. But all the other products are pretty well determined, and I think it would be probably good use of time to knock those out now as a priority A. But priority B, looking at the European Union, not to say that you wait and do these sequentially. There's some things that can be done on the European Union front. I would highly recommend getting the SRN number submitted. There's a couple documents you submit as part of that registration. If you are a non-EU manufacturer, for example, is here in the States and then importing into European Union, there is a little caveat that you have to have your authorized rep become registered first and get an SRN number. And then part of your registration as a manufacturer is to select that from a pull-down list. So coordinating all that, back and forth could consume some time. So that is something that I would actually start right now, and then getting the data started to collect and find out where the gaps are. You can load it into the ReadTech system, and we could provide some validation, help you discover some areas that need to be cleansed and so on. Long before you actually submit to the European Union. So I think I'd go FDA first, and in parallel a little bit with EU, Angela.
Okay, great. And just another comment about guidance. What if the Medical Devices Coordination Group guidance isn't available for some class 1 until after May 26? How are we to comply? I guess you go with what you know.
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot at that. So I think you have to assume that they're in those products are in scope as medical devices until you hear otherwise. So
Yeah.
You plan for the worst case and assume that they will be included. Now, with the European Commission's stance on the lenses, it looks like they're much more aggressive in applying UDI than the FDA. So I have no evidence of this, but I suspect there won't be too many exceptions, but we'll wait and see.
Okay, great. So we're out of time. Thank you to everyone for your participation today. Again, we'll be in touch with links to the recording and the slides, which have a ton of reference information that you can share with your teams. Again, thanks to the Vision Council, and get in touch at meddevice@readtech.com is our email. And we look forward to hearing from you soon about UDI, and have a great day.